Hi, this is Mr. Cordes, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go over and review the assignment requirements for the World Literature Poetry Project. Our course for World Literature is to be exposed and introduced to pieces of literature from around the world. That does include poetry. And for this, we have the opportunity to look at poets and poetry from a variety of places, cultures, that will help us get a more holistic idea of the world that we live in and how it is expressed through poetry. So, looking at this assignment, there is a lot to the assignment. However, each item is going to be due separately, and by the end, you'll have all of the material. It will already have been submitted, and at that point, the project will be done. So when we did the grammar bootcamp assignment, you did all of those things, kept all of those things, and then turned in one thing at the very end. Right now, what this looks like for the poetry project is you're going to do one thing at a time and slowly turn in those items. So by the time you reach the end, you will be finished. Everything will be complete. Okay. At any moment, if you have questions or concerns, you need to message me, ask me for insight and help, simply because we're going to move one assignment builds on the other. So if you miss one, the next one's going to be a little bit more difficult. The next one will be even more difficult because you don't have the background knowledge for the other. So we need to make sure that we're staying on top of the assignments, that we're completing them in order. And here we go. Let's talk about it. Students will complete the following poetry assignments for this project. Each assignment is individually graded and will be submitted separately. So like I just mentioned, everything will be going along the way. Please be attentive to the calendar and due dates. All of that will be listed on the Google Classroom, so you will see it ahead of time. On your submission documents, please format with Times New Roman 12-point font, double line spacing at 0 point. We've gone over formatting before, so that's just a reminder for you. So I'm going to quickly go through all of these components. You can see that there's lots of them, but we're going to be working over them the next 2.5 weeks. So the very first thing that you're going to be doing is finding some poetry and offering some summaries. Okay, you're going to find 3 poems from a particular culture or world region between the dates of 1800 and 1950. Okay, you are looking for certain poets, literature that stands out, poems that reflect that area in the world as well as that culture. Now, if you go over to the Google Classroom on the World Poetry Project, one of the things that is listed are all of the various different places. You can see here Africa, Brazil, France, Egypt, Germany, Japan, Mexico, Romania, Russia, South Africa. There's lots of different places in which you can go out and find poetry. So let's say that you find something for Italy, okay, or Ireland. What you would do is you would go and search for popular poets in Ireland between 1800 and 1950, and find 3 poems that you would want to use, analyze, and conduct your project on that have to do with Ireland. Okay, not the poems have to do with Ireland, but the poems come from Ireland and an Irish writer or poet. Okay, so let's say for whatever reason you select China. Okay, you select China. That's the country you want to look at. You are going to look for Chinese poets between the year 1800 and 1950. Find a poet or poets, can be multiple, and find 3 poems that fit those requirements. Okay, when you find those 3 poems, okay, what you're going to do is you're going to present those poems. So you're going to have the poem there, and then you're going to offer a 3 to 5 sentence summary about what that poem is about. Okay, so the poem may be a couple stanzas long. It could be a haiku, could be something tremendous, but you are going to offer 3 to 5 sentences of summary that will allow for someone to understand what's going on. So the poetry and summaries really is almost just 3 pages because you've got the poem and then you got your little summary at the bottom. You've got your poem and then you got your summary at the bottom. So here it says students will have the poem written out, accompanied by your summary. It also says all poems must be from the same country and or world region. So you don't want one from Italy and then one from France. If the poet travels, that's understandable, but the poet is still in that one region. So if you're finding, let's say, an African poet, he or she is in Africa, we're using those African texts, those African poems. That's what we're using. So everything is the same. So think in your mind, you could probably start processing through this now, is based on this list that's in the Google Classroom, where do I actually want to study? You have the option of selecting, okay? Oh, I know that my family is from India. I want to find some Indian poets and poetry. I want to use that. I know that my family is from France. I want to find some French poets and some French poetry, okay? You are finding those and conducting research to find that. So this gives you a lot of freedom. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is finding out the poet's background. So now that you found the poems that you want to use, what's going on for the poet? And what this is this is going to be at least 2 paragraphs of background information that you piece together from your research. Okay, this is not, oh, here's a biography about the poet. I'm going to cut and paste the first 2 paragraphs. You are putting this into your own words to find this information. Okay. It says, use the list of questions and prompts below to guide your writing. While internet searches are acceptable ways of inquiring information, all paragraph writing must be the student's own work and words. Okay. You're going to use proper in-text and ending citations for where you do pull those items. So if it's from biography.com, poetry.com, poetryfoundation.org, whatever the website is, you need to cite it properly. Okay. And I gave you some questions that are going to help you piece together that information. So where did the poet grow up? What was the time frame? What years? Explain the poet's childhood and family. Did they grow up in a rich community? Were they poor? Did they have lots of brothers and sisters? Were they the only child? Reference any special relationships. Maybe they were married, maybe they weren't. Identify and explain events or circumstances that have contributed. Maybe they lived through a world war. Maybe they lived through a major historical event for that part of the world. Okay. Offer insight and details about who that poet is, and then discuss the poet's influences in writing. Okay. So you are using these to compose 2 paragraphs about background information. Okay. So you have the poems, you've given background information about your poet. The next thing that you will do is find cultural background. What is going on in your part of the world, in that culture, that's special, unique, and different, that sets the poet and poetry apart? So students will research the poets and offer up at least, again, 2 paragraphs of cultural information. You're going to use these prompts and questions as a guide. Okay. Let's see. You're going to cite things properly, just like you did before. Look at some of these questions. Explain the cultural environment and or the climate of the poet during his or her lifetime. What was life like in Italy in the 1800s? What was life like for someone in Germany in the early 1900s, right? Maybe you picked Argentina as your World Poetry Project area. What's going on there? Okay. What traditions, rituals, customs are evident in the poet's culture? Okay. Evaluate the poetry and offer examples of cultural influence. So where do you see that within your poems? So looking back at what the poems actually present, they are presenting something very specific because of the place that they come from. Side story for 30 seconds. I had the opportunity a long time ago to travel over to Rwanda to do some teaching with some university professors, and reading the Rwandan culture and the Rwandan poetry was very evident of the historical events that they had gone through. One of the biggest things that Rwanda has experienced within the last half century would be the genocide, okay, which was actually in the 90s, I think, late 80s, early 90s. That genocide comes through with their poetry. That genocide devastation, the deaths of so many, comes through their poetry. So if I'm looking at these poems, what is the cultural background? What is the historical and cultural background that's being presented? I'm going to explain that in those 2 paragraphs and use these questions to guide. Okay? Now, you have found your poems. You looked at the poet. You looked at the cultural implications, the historical implications. Now it's time for you to do your own poetry writing. And we are going to conduct the same analytical paragraph style of writing that we did for our previous novel. So students will write an analytical paragraph for a poem of their choice. So out of the 3 poems that you picked, you're going to select one, and you're going to write about what is the poet's purpose and what's that literary element that they are using to get that message across. So if the poet is conveying the tragedies of a world war, what's the literary element that they're using to express that? Is it imagery? Is it tone? Is it diction? What is that word that's being, or what are those elements that are being used to present that? Okay. So you're going to be conducting that and identifying the author's purpose and the literary elements. That's going to be a poetry analysis, analytical paragraph. You are doing that once. So up here, you've done 3 poems, 3 summaries. Here you did 2 paragraphs about the poet. Here you did 2 paragraphs about the culture and or history. And then here you do 1 paragraph about 1 poem that analyzes the poet's message and uses the literary element to convey that message. Okay? So those are all the writing components. These are all the tasks that you will accomplish. The very last thing is a video presentation for you to turn your cameras on, unmute your mics, talk and express and say and present all of this information. Because it's one thing for you to study just one part of the world. It's another for you to be knowledgeable about one, but exposed to more. Okay. And the purpose is that we're going to share our videos with the class so that you can be, oh my, this person wrote one on Russia. I want to find out what poems they had in Russia during this time. And so you'd be able to be exposed and informed of that poetry. So for the video presentation, which is super easy, what you need to do is you are going to, using a camera and audio device, students will conduct the following tasks. Okay. First thing that you're going to do is introduce yourself, your culture, your world region. What have you been studying over the last 2.5 weeks? Okay. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to read one of your poems aloud. Now, the poem that you read aloud needs to be the same poem that you did for your poetry analysis. Okay. Because that will be cohesive for your entire project. So you read the 1 poem aloud. You want to make sure that you've obviously practiced, that you have rehearsed, that you've pronounced the words correctly. You want to make sure that you've got rhythm and control and beat and measure and inflections when you talk. Sitting and just mumbling through the paper and reading it for the first time is not going to be sufficient. We want you to take charge and be the poet, okay? And read like the poem is meant to be read. So you've introduced yourself and the culture in which you're working with. You have read the poem aloud, okay, and you've done that well. From there, what you're going to do is you're going to read your paragraphs aloud from what you submitted for the poet background, as well as the cultural background. So the poet background paragraphs and the cultural background paragraphs, you are going to read exactly what you did. You are going to offer that information to the class, okay? From there, you will read your poetry analysis, your analytical paragraph. You will read that aloud. And then the last thing that will happen is that you will give your final thoughts. Studying Greek poetry has been amazing. I really enjoyed how my poet put this, and this together. Looking at my Japanese poets, I really understand the culture and what's meant through the traditions of, X, Y, and Z. You piece this together. Essentially, your video presentation is essentially you saying out loud, reading out loud, presenting all of that information that you worked so well to put together. So this last part, there's nothing new to do this. Maybe take 20, 25 minutes to practice reading those things aloud for your videos, but that's it. Okay. So looking at all the projects one time in review, I know I've gone quick and fast, but you have the chance to stop, pause, go back as needed. For this project, you're piecing everything together and it all builds. So you've got your 3 poems and the 3 summaries that have to do with your culture and world region. You've given me 2 body paragraphs about the poet. You've given me 2 body paragraphs about the culture and or history. You've given me 1 analytical paragraph about 1 poem that you select, talking about author's purpose and the literary element that's used to convey that. And then lastly, you are going to piece it all together and present it in a video presentation. Okay. For the video presentation, there'll be more details as far as technology is concerned. I use Loom to make these videos. Some of you guys could go straight to YouTube and make it there. I don't think Flipgrid has a long enough time frame, so I would not venture with that. But we'll talk about technology later. Okay. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the poetry project that we'll be working on until the end of the semester. If you have questions or concerns, please message me, and we will go through all of it together, one step at a time. All right. In the meantime, as you guys get started, take a look at the list that's presented in the Google Classroom of all of the different locations. What I would do is I would select 3 and then identify, okay, this is my first choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice. So as you begin to do your work, if you like, oh, I'm going to go for Ireland, and you go for Ireland, and then suddenly it's like, this is not really what I want, then you could go on to your next option. Okay. Once again, message me if you have any questions or concerns. I will talk to you later.